Check 1, 2, 3. Sound check 1, 2, 3.
Wait, so when did you guys leave?
I'm not going.
Oh, I thought you were going.
Not me. Jason. Isn't Jason going to Latvia?
Oh, Howell said, Brady said that you were going.
You heard Jason and Janice.
No,
You just got mixed up with
no,
them.
I didn't. I swear, I was like, well, why is Janice going?
Shit, to say it like that. No, I'm not going. I don't
What are you doing for the
stay
fourth?
here. I might, but I jam to go to. Oh no, this isn't on early August. Nothing yet. I'll be here. How about you? Are you going now?
So we're gonna be back, but then I'm going to Bethany Beach.
That's so quick. How long? A week?
We're leaving today,
Tonight?
and we're getting
Okay.
back Friday morning.
Right. Early Friday morning. So you go for the weekend, you're going to the beach?
Yeah, so like friends are actually picking me up from Dulles, and we're just driving out. Yeah.
Bethany?
Yeah, yeah.
My parents have a place in Ocean City. I know. I say that when
We
I
were just out
talk.
there last weekend.
It's
Kinda-
gross.
This committee will come to order. Pursuant to notice, we meet today to mark up H.R. 2494, the Global Anti-Poaching Act, and without objection, all members may have 5 days to submit statements for the record and any extraneous materials regarding this bill. And without objection, the bill is considered read and open for amendment at any point. And I will begin by recognizing myself and any other members seeking recognition to speak on the underlying bill, and then we will move to consider any amendments that the members here may have. And I would just like to thank the chairs, our ranking member, Mr. Engel, the ranking members of the subcommittees, because we had a number of individuals work on this legislation, including the members of the Terrorism, Nonproliferation, and Trade Committee and the Africa Subcommittee. And Mr. Poe held a hearing to highlight the connection between terrorism and wildlife trafficking. I'd also like to thank Warku Gachu on our staff for his important work on this anti-trafficking legislation. Wildlife trafficking and poaching, frankly, has become a serious national security threat to the United States, and you can see that the modus operandi used by the Janjaweed, you know, coming out of North Africa, or by the Al-Shabaab in Somalia, or frankly by Joseph Kony and his recruitment of child soldiers. The objective is the same. It's to get their hands on an asset here in terms of rhino horn or in terms of ivory tusk from an elephant. But in so doing, and getting the hard currency for their terrorist operations, what they're doing is extinguishing these species. And because of poaching, some of the world's most majestic animals, forest elephants, elephants at large, rhinos, are being decimated. And the terrorists are the ones benefiting. So it's got very high profit margins, it's got minimal risk, and this illicit wildlife trade has become a blood currency for transnational gangs and criminal syndicates. It's a lot like blood diamonds were some years ago for Al-Qaeda. If we look at the numbers, it's not hype to ask, do we want our children to grow up in a world without these species, without any elephants or rhinos, because that's where we're headed. Between 1990 and 2005, an average of 14 rhinos were killed annually by poachers in South Africa. Last year, if we look at the losses from poaching, we have 1,200 killed in one country. So these species will be eliminated if we do not take decisive action against these organized criminal networks that are targeting rhino horn and ivory. The committee has held several hearings and briefings on this issue, in which we learned that a number of rebel groups and terrorist organizations made big profits because they're trading ivory for guns. Park rangers are being outmaneuvered and outmatched by today's poachers, who have sophisticated transportation and communications equipment, and some poachers kill in mass numbers. They use helicopters, they use automatic weapons from those helicopters. This bipartisan legislation will help even out the fight by granting the President authority to provide vital security assistance, including vehicles, as well as intelligence and surveillance tools. In addition, we know that designating foreign governments that aren't doing their part can be very effective for bringing about change. This bill will prod countries to take action by naming and shaming, as we do with human rights and human trafficking reports. And we also make this notorious business riskier by making wildlife trafficking an offense under racketeering and money laundering statutes, going after the network and taking any profits through forfeitures. The legislation also directs that any seized assets from these new penalties go towards the conservation of the very species that was trafficked. This legislation has been a collaborative process with other key committees and NGOs and interested organizations, as well as with the administration. and I look forward to its quick passage in the fight against poaching and to save these species. I just remind everyone, time is not on our side. I'll now recognize any members on the underlying bill. Do any members seek recognition? Hearing no further requests to speak, we will now move to consider any amendments. I have an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2494, offered by Mr. Royce of California. Page 9, after line 17, insert the following. F. Sunset. This section shall terminate on the date that is 5 years after the date of the enactment of this act.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with, okay? So I recognize myself to speak on the amendment. This is pretty straightforward. It would sunset the name and shame list of troubling countries under Section 5 of the bill after 5 years. As members know, too many requests get put into law and last forever, and I think the 5-year termination will prevent that from happening and bring the bill into compliance with rules for the House floor. Plus, it will give the committee the opportunity after a few years to evaluate the department's use of this designation requirement and improve the requirements if necessary at that time. Do any members seek recognition to speak on this amendment? Hearing no further speakers, the question occurs on the amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. And the item considered en bloc or agreed to. Are there any other amendments? Hearing no further amendments.
I have an amendment.
Mr. Grayson.
Should the go ahead.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2494, offered by Mr. Grayson of Florida. Page 11, after line 5, insert the following. E. Rule of construction. Nothing in this section shall be construed to authorize the use of United States Armed Forces in combat activities. Page 11, line 6, strike E and insert F.
I'm recognizing Mr. Grayson for what time he might consume.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to keep as short as possible. I understand we have votes now. Poaching is a very serious problem, and frankly, it's one of the great elements of being on this committee to see us taking such constructive action in this regard. One of my fondest moments was to visit gorillas in their natural habitat a couple of years ago. I'll always remember what that was like. They're down to fewer than 700 in the wild now. And like many other large species, charismatic species, if you will, they might not be there for much longer. So I think that we're doing something extremely constructive today. I applaud your effort. I'm offering this amendment for a specific, very limited purpose. The amendment states as follows. Nothing in this section shall be construed to authorize the use of the United States Armed Forces in combat activities. I think it's important to state as a principle explicitly in this bill exactly what we are doing, but also what we are not doing. We would want to see U.S. forces entangled in combat activities as a result of fighting poaching. That's, in essence, a declaration of war. We don't want to do something like that by accident. I did notice that the bill includes the Section 47 Arms Export Control Act definitions of some of the more sensitive elements of the bill, for instance, defense services, training, and so on. But when it comes to war, I think we have to use belt and suspenders. That's why I offer this amendment. I yield.
If I could recognize myself, because I appreciate the gentleman's explanation. And I don't think, on balance, we should adopt this amendment, and I'll walk you through the process why. The security assistance authorized in this legislation is typical of the type of security assistance that this committee supports on a routine basis without this concern. And in fact, I don't recall having a provision like this in legislation that the committee has carried in the past. So I agree with the gentleman's sentiment here. The War Powers Act, though, makes it crystal clear, and let me read from the act. The authority to introduce the U.S. Armed Forces into hostilities shall not be inferred from any provision of law unless there is a specific authorization. So first of all, it's not inferred here in the first place. But even if it was, the War Powers Act says to introduce the U.S. Armed Forces into hostilities shall not be inferred from any provision of law unless there is a specific authorization, which does not exist. Clearly, there's nothing in this bill that does authorize the use of force, and given possible sensitivities, and this is the aspect of this that concerns me, given the possible sensitivities surrounding our assistance in Africa, I'm not sure that this type of language does not raise suspicions about our activities. We want African countries taking advantage of this assistance, not fighting off false rumors of military operations. And that's the concern that I would derive from the amendment. I'm concerned that the gentleman's language, despite his agreeable intentions, would raise concerns, would raise misunderstandings where none are warranted. So I would ask for a no vote on the amendment. Yes, any other members? Yes, Mr. Alan Lowenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to yield my time to Mr. Grayson to respond.
Thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate what the chairman is saying, and I appreciate the clarification. Every word that we say here is recorded for posterity. The words that we state are part of the legislative history that is associated with this bill. I appreciate the chairman's insight regarding this issue. If the chairman is specifically saying that this bill could not be used to justify any combat forces being introduced as a result of this bill, I accept what he's saying.
And let me add to that, Mr. Grayson, because I think what I propose, if I could ask you this.
I'll yield.
If we were to go to the floor and we did a colloquy on this very subject, would that give you added assurance in terms of the intention?
Yes, it would. And my goal is very simple, to see that this bill not become an excuse, even inadvertently, for the tragedy of war in the name of saving the lives of animals. So I accept the chairman's generous proposal, and with that in mind, I will withdraw my amendment.
Ask unanimous consent without objection. Very good. Mr. Grayson, thank you, and we will have that colloquy on the floor. I think Mr. Poe has an amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2494, offered by Mr. Poe of Texas. At the end of the following, Section 9, Other Actions Relating to Wildlife Trafficking Programs. It is the sense of Congress that the Secretary
Chairman,
of
I ask
State...
unanimous consent to dispense with the reading of the amendment.
Without objection. Mr. Poe is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to make it clear that I support the bill. I'm a co-sponsor to the bill. One of the issues that I am concerned about, as other members, based upon the fact that I'm chair of the subcommittee on terrorism, is the trafficking of wildlife, rhino horns and tusks of elephants in Africa by terrorist groups. A couple of quick statistics. In the 30s, there were 3 to 5 million elephants in Africa, 3 to 5 million. Now there are 300,000 to maybe 500,000 elephants. Rhino population has diminished so quickly that we may see in our lifetime no rhinos. There are only 5 white rhinos left in the world. And many of them are being poached and killed by terrorist groups. How many? We don't know. We don't know who all is involved in the harvesting and killing of rhinos and elephants. So this amendment is very simple. It tells the State Department to evaluate our aid in wildlife trafficking in Africa and find out exactly what's working and what's not. And that's this amendment, and I would ask that the Chair support the amendment so that we have the State Department do an evaluation. Separately, USAID does their own, but the State Department doesn't do an evaluation. So we ask that our money be evaluated on how it's working or whether it's not working, with the goal to stop wildlife trafficking, with emphasis on these terrorist groups and locating them, how much resources they're using, and what they're doing to harvest rhino horns and elephant tusk because of the ever decreasing numbers of these species. I'll yield back to the chair.
I appreciate the gentleman's amendment and its work also to develop and implement a learning agenda to improve the performance and impact of wildlife trafficking programs and to share best practices among executive branch agencies. I think the totality of this is very much in keeping with what we would like to achieve with the legislation. And so if I don't hear any further requests to speak on the amendment, then the question occurs on the amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Hearing no further amendments, the chair now moves that H.R. 2494 as amended be adopted by the committee. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The bill as amended is agreed to, and without objection, H.R. 2494 as amended is ordered favorably reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute. Staff is directed to make technical and conforming changes, and the chair is authorized to seek consideration under suspension of the rules. And I again want to thank Ranking Member Engel, our co-sponsors, and all of our committee members for their contributions to today's markup. And I'll remind the members that we have 1 minute and 11 seconds left in the vote. We stand adjourned. Thank you.
My check, 1, 2, 1, 2.